Hello students, I wanted to provide a video walkthrough of the developmental analysis assignment so that you can make sure that you're including the critical elements that I'm looking for when I grade your paper. Some students have continued to make some consistent APA errors in your essays, and I don't want you to make those same mistakes with this paper. This paper is a longer paper. It's more important that all your APA formats are on target and that you're including the elements you need to. So I wanted to just do this walkthrough. I have the instructions, I have the tips for success that I provided, and then I actually have a sample paper that I'm going to flash on the screen and show you the different elements that made the paper a good paper. Okay, just to start out with, this is your instructions. You need to read over those. I've highlighted some things that I want you to take special note of. One is that this is a personal paper. You may use first person when you're telling your story, but you also are required to integrate a working knowledge of theories, terminologies, and concepts from all of our studying this term. Then you're going to analyze your life as it relates to those theories, terminologies, and concepts, okay, and talk about what the key developmental times in your life were. Now, those can be different, obviously, from one person to the other. So for this paper, there's no right or wrong answers. It's more about you determining what are some major things that you can talk about from your developmental history and apply some of the theories, terminologies, and concepts in a thoughtful and intelligent manner. Okay, so I'm not looking for just a chronological story of your life. I assume that you will start from infancy and go through adulthood, but that equal attention would not be given to each of those aspects, but that you would decide what are some meaningful things. I don't want a paper that says, oh, I was normal, everything was fine, yada da da da. That is just usually a paper that does not have a lot of thought. We all have our individual milestones that we went through, our hang-ups, the things that were challenging to us. Okay, for example, for me, I had a hearing loss that was discovered when I was in the 3rd grade. I had a lot of school anxiety right around that same time, probably related to just not hearing well and understanding well. I was a gifted athlete, so I know that interaction had a different effect than, say, my hearing loss and my school anxiety. That was a whole different part, but that's interesting that I have some weaknesses I could talk about, have some strengths. I had a mother who had a lot of depression as I was growing up through my teenage years, so that impacted some of my developmental milestones. So those are things, like if I was doing this paper, that I would talk about. That makes me a lot more interesting than just saying, oh yeah, everything was fine, I went through this stage like I was supposed to, my parents were perfect, etc. Okay, the other piece that you can integrate into this that I expect you to is your spiritual development. For example, I was saved when I was 15, went through a lot of different stages of rebellion against that, of exploration, went to a Christian college that had a profound impact on me, did my PhD with Liberty, so had the opportunity to integrate a lot of Christian worldview concepts, which was influential. So those are the things I would talk about. Your spiritual development journey would be much different, but you want to integrate that, whether you were saved when you were 5 or 15 or recently, or maybe it's something that you're still struggling with. That is a piece of the paper that you can also include. Okay, now, just like your essays, you do need to provide conclusions that talk about further studies. Those are only going to come logically from empirical articles. Empirical articles need to be found in the library. You can't Google these. More than likely, you're not going to have access to those. If you do, it's going to be the abstract. You need to have full access to 7 empirical articles. Those are peer-reviewed, which means that somebody did some research, spent lots of money and time doing it, came up with some really good statistics and conclusions and findings, got it published in a journal that is reviewed by his or her peers, that it goes through a review process before it's even published. So that process, when we're looking at research in our discipline, is really, really important. Okay, so that's why it's important that you're using that type of research to validate the ideas that you talk about in your paper. Otherwise, when you're pulling it from a website or this or that, you have no idea how valid that information is. I could go and post to a website and talk about underwater basket weaving, and I could probably be really convincing about different things. I might be able to convince you how to do it without even having any expertise in it. That's what you get when you Google stuff. Even on some of our associations' websites, it's good information, but it is not necessarily valid or reliable until we start using empirical research that has been tested, that's been reviewed, has gone through a lot of process to get published, and that's what you want to back up your ideas. It will also always offer opposing views and suggestions for further research. You're always going to find that in the discussion or conclusion section of those empirical articles. So you can't get away from it for this paper. Many of you all have really run from that, and you're going to find once you go to the library and do your search and have free access to these wonderful documents, that you're going to see why we really push you to do that. It's really important skill for you as a graduate student to get really comfortable with. Okay, so then let me just look through the tips for success, because this I start getting into a little bit more of the APA fundamentals that you need to include, like headings to organize your content. If I gave you a book or even somebody's paper, if you were reading it like I have to, and you picked up that paper and there were no chapters, or you picked up a book and there was no chapters, there were no headings, it was just paragraph after paragraph, or it was paragraphs that lasted 2 and 3 pages long, more than likely you would just put that down. I know you would if you were in a bookstore and picked up a book and there was no table of contents, there were no chapters, it was just paragraph after paragraph after paragraph after paragraph, and there was no organization, no structure. That is not a good thing, okay? And our APA format is just like your scaffolding for your paper. It's not some mysterious topic. It's no codes. It's nothing like that. It's more about how you present your information. Okay, so you need to use headings to organize your paper. Main headings are boldface and centered. Any headings that go along with those main headings would be on the left margin, boldface. Then when you change back to a main heading, you go back to boldface and center. Okay, those are required to be in your paper. Like I said, you do want to include empirical studies related to your chosen developmental aspect of your life. So if I was talking about school-related anxiety in children, which is what a feature of my developmental history I would talk about, then my articles would address that and give some insight to that phenomenon that happens with kids. When they have school anxiety, what's it related to? I know mine was related to a hearing loss, a possible learning disability, all related to that, and it caused a lot of anxiety. So I would look for articles that addressed how maybe learning disabilities or hearing losses relate to school anxiety, and I would go from there. If I was looking about how athletics helped adolescent development, then I would look for articles with those headings and those topics and try to see what made sense for my story. And I would include that in my developmental analysis. My mom had major depression. I may go do a search for parents with mental illnesses, how it affects teenagers. Okay, so all those things, whatever is relevant for you, I can promise you'll find an empirical study on it. Okay, so this, again, I'm not interested in just a little personal story telling me how perfect everything was, and I'm really not interested in a story that tells me how imperfect your life was with no empirical backing. Okay, so if you bring up an issue, which I want you to, you may want to pick 3 or 4 major things to talk about, and your spiritual development. Those are the things I want you to add empirical evidence to. Not everything you talk about, you have to include empirical evidence. But if it's one of your major headings, it's going to give you a lot to write about if you'll include that empirical support. In your conclusion paragraph, you're going to summarize some of the key points, mentioning 1 or 2 opportunities for further research that you're going to find in the articles that you use. Okay, let's move on quickly. And here is a sample paper that I wanted you to have your eyes on. Look at the running header. That's in APA format. It's embedded in the Word header for the document. See, it doesn't move when I double click up here. It's embedded. It says running header on the first, gives me the short title, gives me the page number. The title page is supposed to have 3 lines. 1 is the title, 1 is the name, and 2nd will be Liberty University. The title page does not have anything else on it. Everything for your work will be 12 font and black ink. There's no fancy smancy in APA. Then I have an abstract, and if you'll notice, the heading has changed just to include the short title. The word running header is no longer included. That's only a feature that you put on your title page. All pages following that have your short title and your page number. The abstract here is not indented, but it is aligned with the left margin, and it is less than 250 words, but more than 150 words. And it is a brief summary of what I can expect to read in your paper and the flow of your paper. Doesn't give me any new information that won't be covered in your paper. It's an introduction to your paper. Okay? So I should be able to read this and say, okay, I know exactly what this student's going to cover. Next, you repeat the title of your paper on your very first page. Okay, you'll notice that the heading up here is consistent. Only the title page is different. So I've got you repeat the title of your paper here, give a brief introduction, and then you start writing. This student, the headers don't matter. I don't care if you give me a chronological header or a subject-based header, but your header here, or your heading, should tell me what the next section is going to be about. And then when I look at it real quick down through there, there should be some type of order that catches my eyes. So this student started out and talked about in the womb. She had talked about how her mother was really careful, avoided all these bad things, and then talked about, so she didn't really talk about anything specific, but then she went on to say, hey, my mom didn't have any of this, but if she did, like postpartum depression, then these are the things that should have been considered. So that was fine. Then she went on, as she noticed that she has some good paragraphs, 2 or 3 paragraphs here that are well written. They have citations throughout. She uses multiple sources to emphasize her points. And then this next section, I know that she's going to talk to me about her infancy and toddler years, and she does that. Okay, not much there. Probably because nothing major happened. When we get into her early and middle childhood, She gives us a little bit more because her parents got divorced. And so within this, there's a lot of dialogue about how divorce